My name is Lisa, and I'm 24 years old. I'm a college student living in a small town in Michigan. Last weekend, I went to visit my parents for a few days. They live about an hour away, and I usually drive back late at night to avoid traffic. It was around 11 p.m. when I said goodbye to them and got in my car for the drive back. I've always been comfortable driving at night, but this time, something didn't feel right. I was about halfway home, driving on a stretch of highway that cut through a quiet rural area. There were hardly any other cars around, just the occasional truck passing by. As I drove, I noticed a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it, just another car on the road. But after a few minutes, I realized that the car wasn't passing me. It was sticking close, following every turn I made. At first, I thought maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe the driver was going in the same direction. But when I took a random exit off the highway, just to see if they'd follow, they did. The car turned off with me, staying right behind. My heart started racing, but I tried to stay calm. I figured if I just kept driving, they'd eventually go away. But they didn't. As I entered a more rural area, the car suddenly sped up and got right behind me, tailgating me so closely that I could see their headlights flashing in my mirror. Panic set in. I tried to accelerate, but the car stayed right on me, almost pushing me to go faster. The road was dark and winding, with no streetlights, and I had no idea who was driving that car or what they wanted. I grabbed my phone and tried to call 911, but there was no signal. My heart sank. I felt trapped, with no way to get help. The car behind me started flashing its high beams, blinding me in the rearview mirror. It was terrifying. I didn't know what to do. The road ahead was empty, no houses, no businesses, just miles of darkness. My mind raced with horrible possibilities. Was this some kind of sick prank? Or was I being hunted? In a desperate attempt to shake them, I spotted a dirt road off to the right and made a sharp turn onto it. The car didn't follow at first, so I floored it down the bumpy road, the headlights vanishing behind me. The road was narrow, lined with trees on both sides, and I kept driving, hoping I'd lose them. After a few minutes, I pulled over and turned off my car. My hands were shaking. The only sounds were the wind and the occasional rustling of leaves. I sat there in the dark, trying to calm down, but my heart was still pounding. I waited, hoping the car had passed, and I'd be safe. After what felt like forever, I didn't see any more headlights. I thought I was in the clear. Slowly, I started the car again and crept back onto the main road. The highway was empty, and for a while, everything seemed normal. I was still shaken, but I felt relieved. I drove the rest of the way home, checking my mirrors constantly, but there was no sign of the car. It was over, or so I thought. When I finally pulled into my driveway and parked, I sat in the car for a moment, trying to process everything. The adrenaline was wearing off, but I still felt uneasy. I grabbed my bag and got out, locking the car behind me. That's when I noticed something. There was a piece of paper stuck under my windshield wiper. My stomach dropped as I unfolded it. Written in messy handwriting, the note read, "Next time, you won't get away." My blood ran cold. How had they found me? They must have followed me at some point, even after I thought I'd lost them. I felt sick to my stomach. I looked around the street, but it was empty, just the quiet houses and the dim glow of streetlights. I was alone, but I didn't feel safe anymore. Someone had been watching me, following me, and they knew where I lived. I rushed inside, locking every door and window, but I couldn't shake the fear. That note was a warning, and I had no idea who was behind it or if they'd come back. Every sound outside made me jump. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about those headlights, the car tailing me, and the note that sent a chill down my spine. Now, every time I drive alone at night, I can't stop checking the mirrors, wondering if someone is following me again.
. 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 。
. . . .
。 . 。 . 。 . 。 .
My name is Nathan. I'm 28 years old, and I work as a delivery driver in a small town outside of Cleveland, Ohio. After long shifts, I usually just drive straight home, ready to crash for the night. That night, it was almost midnight, and I was exhausted. The roads were empty, and I was counting the minutes until I could crawl into bed. But then, something unexpected happened. As I drove down a dark, deserted stretch of road, I saw someone up ahead. At first, I thought it was an illusion, but as I got closer, I realized it was a young woman. She was standing by the side of the road, waving her arms frantically. She looked scared, maybe desperate. My gut told me not to stop. I mean, who waves down a car at this hour on a deserted road? But something about her made me hesitate. I slowed down, thinking she might be in real trouble. Against my better judgment, I pulled over. She rushed up to the passenger side window, looking panicked. "Can you give me a ride to the gas station? It's just a few minutes down the road," she said, her voice shaky. I was hesitant, but it didn't seem like a big ask. It was late, and I figured she might have been stranded. I unlocked the door, and she got in. We drove in silence for the first few minutes. I tried to ask her if she was okay, but she just muttered something about needing to get to the gas station. Her eyes were fixed straight ahead, her face pale, and her hands were shaking in her lap. Something about the whole situation felt wrong. I should have listened to that feeling. When we finally reached the gas station, it looked completely abandoned. No cars, no people, just the flickering lights of the pumps. I pulled up, and before I could say anything, two men appeared from the shadows. They were big, dressed in dark clothes, and before I could even react, they were at my windows, banging on the glass. One of them had a knife. My heart dropped. I realized too late what was happening. The woman hadn't said a word, but I could see it now. This had been a setup. She was bait. I glanced over at her, and she was just sitting there, calm, like nothing was wrong. And then she smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was cold, calculated. Panic shot through me. My brain was screaming to do something, but I was frozen for a second, trying to figure out how to get out of this. One of the men started yanking at the door handle, trying to get in. I knew if they got me out of the car, it was over. My mind raced. I didn't know if they were going to rob me, kill me, or worse. With my heart pounding in my chest, I made a split-second decision. I floored the gas pedal, tires screeching as my car lurched forward. The man with the knife dove out of the way, and I barely missed him. I didn't look back. I just kept driving, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they hurt. My rearview mirror showed nothing but darkness. They were gone. I was safe, or so I thought. As I drove, I couldn't stop thinking about that woman. That smile she gave me just before I sped off. It was like she knew exactly what was going to happen, and she enjoyed it. She hadn't been scared or desperate. She had been part of the plan all along. I didn't stop driving until I was home, my heart still racing. I parked the car and just sat there for a while, trying to process what had happened. My phone had no signal out there on the road, so calling for help hadn't even been an option. I was alone, and I had barely escaped. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, that eerie smile that seemed to mock me. I kept thinking, what if I hadn't sped off in time? What if they had caught me? I'll never know exactly what their plan was, but I'm sure it wasn't good. Now, every time I'm driving late at night, I feel that same fear creeping up on me. I keep looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me. I've learned my lesson. Never stop for anyone on an empty road, no matter how desperate they look. Because sometimes, what looks like someone in need might just be a trap. And I'll never forget the chilling smile of the woman who almost got me. My name is Rachel. I'm 29 years old, and I've been working as a nurse for almost 5 years in Boston. Last night was one of the longest shifts I've ever worked, a double shift at the hospital that left me completely drained. By the time I was driving home, it was well past midnight, and all I wanted was to collapse into bed. But what happened on that drive home made me wish I had never left the hospital. It started as I merged onto the highway. At first, I thought it was just my exhaustion messing with my head. But after a few minutes, I heard a dull thumping sound coming from the back of my car. It was faint at first, almost like something had fallen over in the trunk. I didn't think too much of it. Maybe a water bottle rolling around or some groceries I had forgotten to bring inside. But the sound didn't stop. In fact, it got louder. My anxiety started creeping in, but I told myself it was nothing. I was just tired. I tried turning up the radio to drown out the noise, but my focus kept slipping back to that constant, steady thump coming from the trunk. The more I listened, the more uneasy I felt. Something about the rhythm of the sound felt off. After a few miles, I couldn't ignore it anymore. My heart was racing, and my palms were sweating. I decided to pull over. The highway was empty, and there were no streetlights where I stopped. It was just me, the darkness, and that thumping noise. With my phone flashlight in hand, I got out of the car, hesitating for a moment before walking to the back. I felt a chill run down my spine as I opened the trunk, expecting to find something, anything, that could explain the noise. But the trunk was empty. No water bottle, no groceries, nothing. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space, trying to make sense of it. My mind raced with explanations, but none of them seemed to fit. Feeling ridiculous, I slammed the trunk shut and got back in the car. I convinced myself it had to be my imagination or some random noise from the road. I started driving again, but my nerves were shot. Every little sound made me jump. My mind was playing tricks on me. But as I neared my apartment, the thumping returned. Only this time, it was louder, much louder. I could feel the vibrations in my seat. My stomach dropped. Something was wrong, and I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. When I pulled into my parking spot outside my apartment, I didn't waste any time. I jumped out of the car, my hands shaking as I rushed to the trunk. I fumbled with the keys, my heart pounding in my ears. The second I opened it, I froze. There, on the inside of the trunk lid, was a bloodied handprint. It was smeared, like someone had been trying to push their way out from inside. My heart felt like it had stopped. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. How could this be possible? Who had been in my car? I immediately called the police, my voice trembling as I tried to explain what I had found. It felt like an eternity before they arrived, but when they did, I could barely think straight. I kept looking at that handprint, my mind filled with terrifying images of what could have happened. The police inspected the car and found something I hadn't noticed. Scratches on the inside of the trunk, like someone had been clawing at the metal, trying to get out. My blood ran cold when they told me what they believed had happened. Someone had broken into my car while it was parked at the hospital. They had been hiding in the trunk, waiting for the right moment to attack. The plan had been to strike when I pulled over or stopped. But for some reason, they never got the chance. Maybe they panicked when I checked the trunk the first time, or maybe something scared them off. I'll never know. All I do know is that I was lucky, terrifyingly lucky. If I hadn't been so on edge, if I hadn't heard that sound, I might not be here to tell this story. The thought of what could have happened still haunts me. Now, every time I get into my car, I check the trunk first. I don't care how paranoid it makes me seem. I'd rather be paranoid than whatever the alternative could have been. Some nights, I still hear that thumping sound in my head, and I wonder who was back there, what they were planning, and why I was spared.